Hello and welcome to Conversations with Ruth. I am Ruth. I am also known as Notorious RVG. During the time I worked with ACLU, I encountered legal aid attorneys and was always impressed with their dedication and good work. I realized that I do not know much about legal aid of North Carolina. I have wondered what legal aid really is. How is legal aid able to serve all those that are eligible for its services? That legal aid not only provides services in specific areas, but to target populations, such as veterans, seniors, Native Americans, and victims of trafficking. Equally important is what are the services legal aid provides? Well, to answer those questions, I ask that you join me in a series of interviews about getting to know legal aid of North Carolina. I promise you that I and you together, we will learn what legal aid is and what services it provides. Hi there, and welcome to Conversations with Ruth. I am Ruth, and I'm going to insist that you do not call me Notorious RVG. Call me Justice. Today's conversation is about our series Getting to Know Legal Aid. It is my personal quest, I think, to find out what legal aid is and what it does. And you all know that legal aid handles and represents individuals in several areas of practice, housing and consumer, to name a few. But today we're going to talk about a different approach of legal aid, an approach to serve people in a different way, I think. We're going to talk about community economic development, called CED, and that's how I'm going to refer to it, and the disaster relief program. And these projects are projects that address services in a different way, as I said. The CED project assists nonprofits and other community groups to develop programs that address the needs of the community. And the disaster relief program is designed to help individuals with legal needs after a natural disaster. So today, handling two projects, we have two guests. We have Leslie Arbitron. Leslie, thank you for coming and being here with us. And Evan Lewis. Evan, thank you for being here. I'm delighted to have both of you here. And let me say a little bit about both of you. Leslie is the supervising attorney in the legal aid office in Greenville. Is that right?
That's right.
And she's also the practice manager of the disaster relief program. And Evan is a solo practitioner in Washington, North Carolina. I imagine a different Washington than the one I live.
That's right.
That's right.
The original Washington.
The original Washington. I am glad to hear that. He is a solo practitioner and specializes in several areas, including Social Security claims, business law, and taxpayer rights. But he's a former legal aid attorney, and even better, he is a volunteer of legal aid pro bono program. So, Leslie, let's start with you. And I think we all know what a disaster is. But maybe it would be good in the context of our conversation that you tell us what it means for your project. What is a natural disaster?
So Justice, in the context of our project, it means a hurricane, a tornado, or a flood, for instance, that results in substantial property damage and a loss of life.
And actually, recently, I read in the paper that there was a tornado in Greensboro. So that's a new disaster that you're dealing with?
That's right, we are, and it was just declared an official disaster this week.
So when a disaster like that happens, the one in Greensboro, for example, what are the common legal issues that clients have that need help from legal aid?
Most of the common legal issues center around loss of property and access to programs such as federal disaster relief programs like FEMA and displacement from homes.
So when someone calls with questions about benefits from a program like FEMA, what can they expect from legal aid?
So we try to help them on a number of levels, and it's very case specific, but we can help them understand how to apply for those benefits initially, and if they're denied, how to appeal that denial. And for instance, to give you an example from Hurricane Matthew, which the eastern part of our state is still recovering from, our Wilson office recently helped a woman who'd been basically lost her home in that hurricane and received some benefits but was still paying her mortgage on the home. We helped her negotiate the balance of that mortgage for a payoff and saved her thousands of dollars so that she could find a new place to live.
So those are homeowners. How about people that rent? That Greensboro tornado I mentioned, I remember in the news it said it affected an area where a lot of people were renting.
That's right. There are a lot of renters who face a completely different set of issues in a natural disaster. So both that tornado and Matthew affected a lot of renters, and they can face situations like a landlord who does not want to or can't afford to make repairs to their rental unit but still wants rent, or displacement from their rental unit, and they usually are folks of modest means who can't afford to find a new place to rent.
So when someone like that calls legal aid, an attorney provides services, individualized services?
Absolutely.
So Evan, this may be the right time to talk about the CED, and I hope I was not too simplistic in thinking that CED projects help communities help themselves. But in a disaster such as the one we talk about, what role will CED play, if any?
Well, for an example, in Pitt County, Leslie and I have both been working with the Pitt County Recovery Group, and that's an organization that's a coalition of existing nonprofit groups and the county itself that are dedicated not only to coordinating resources to help people and avoid duplication of resources by working together as a coalition, but also preparing Greenville for future disasters by building the resiliency of the community to make it more inherently able to recover from these disasters more easily than in the past.
Is there any way to maybe in a simple way explain that what CED does? What are the examples, the areas where it works with?
Well, I guess the first thing is what do we do? How do we help these organizations? And we do what lawyers do. We advise them. We help them establish legal identities, obtain charitable status, so that they can get donations, and the donations are tax deductible by the donors. And we help them stay in compliance as they move forward by making sure their bylaws are reasonable and they're able to comply with the bylaws. They're not just getting something online that might fit some organization but not theirs. So there's a match between their rules and their abilities to comply, let's put it that way, making sure that they're avoiding private inurement issues, that they're not benefiting people other than the people that they're charged with serving. And I think the most important thing to know about that is our clients, legal aid clients live in communities that are traditionally disinvested in. They've lacked bank financing, government services, and other things that many communities take for granted, frankly, but they can't. So the CED effort is an effort to help groups that are determined to overcome the effects of that disinvestment through using our legal abilities to make them more effective in doing it.
So if, for example, someone calls from the Greensboro area and says, I want to create a group that provides transitional housing to some of the displaced people, what help will legal aid provide that person?
Well, again, if they need to get organized into an entity that qualifies for recognition of exemption from the IRS so that they can get their 501c3 status recognition, then we would help them do what they need to do to put themselves in that position, incorporate the organization, as I said, create bylaws that they can effectively operate under, and make sure they have a conflicts of interest policy, and advise them of the consequences and value of obtaining recognition of exemption, and then help them file the application for recognition of exemption from the IRS. But it really doesn't end there. In the process of building that transitional housing, they may need help with deeds. They might get donations of property to help them help those folks that are displaced. And there are going to be contracts involved, inevitably. There's going to be a loan probably from a financial institution that needs to be reviewed. So they're basically all the things that IBM's counsel does for them in terms of reviewing those things. Legal aid does for these groups.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic. And that brings me to something I was thinking when you were talking, Leslie. When there's a disaster, you have long-term needs and then you have short, immediate needs. How does legal aid handle the immediate needs of victims of a disaster?
That's a great question. So after Hurricane Matthew, it was estimated that North Carolina suffered about $1.5 billion worth of damage to about 100,000 homes and businesses. So that's a lot of folks in need of legal services. So what we tried to do immediately after Matthew, and did successfully, I believe, is put together, first of all, some self-help videos that victims could access online, and they showed people how to do things like apply for FEMA benefits, replace lost documents, like for instance a birth certificate or a will, and how to access emergency food stamps to replace lost food. Then we also, in conjunction with the North Carolina Bar Association and their volunteers, set up a hotline so that victims could call us to get legal advice over the phone.
I see. So you create an army of people to help immediate needs and help people right away.
We did. We relied on volunteers like Evan in the private bar quite a lot to help reach as many people as we can.
Okay. And are you doing that now for the Greensboro area?
We are in that process right now, working with the same folks we worked with from the Bar Association before.
I noticed that you also mentioned that there are still people affected from Matthew. So we're talking about long-term effects. What are exactly are the needs of those people now?
So believe it or not, even almost 2 years out from the hurricane, there are many people who are still in the process of applying for funds to repair their homes. And these are mostly homeowners or people who own rental property. And they're just sort of going through the application process to access some of those state and federal funds. And unfortunately, in our eastern part of the state, where we have a large rural population and a population that's traditionally African American and low income, and where access to attorneys has been traditionally very scarce and really still is, people may live in property that has been passed from generation to generation without the benefit of a will ever having been drafted or a deed ever having been drafted. So one of the barriers they face to getting money to repair these family homes is that they can't show ownership. But legal aid can help with that, and that's something we're working very hard to do at this point so that people can get the money that they need in order to repair homes and land and property that's been in their family for generations.
Yeah, and having those deeds is important for other things like obtaining loans and mortgages. That's a great effort, and I am quite impressed by it. Evan, I do have to ask you, what the CED does when it addresses job readiness or employment? What exactly happens?
Well, it's essentially the same process as your question about transitional housing for disaster victims. A community group contacts legal aid and says, we want to increase the employability of folks in our neighborhood. And we also want to maybe attract employers into our neighborhood. And it's really, legal aid doesn't do the community organizing. The community comes to legal aid and says, how can you help us with your legal abilities achieve our goals?
I see.
So in that case, the process is pretty much the same. If the group needs to be legally organized, we would provide the legal organization. I think, from a personal perspective, I think a key thing that legal aid can help with is because legal aid usually is so involved in its community, it's aware of what resources are out there to serve their clients. It's not just legal aid as separate from the community, but as part of the community. And so I think a key thing that legal aid lawyers need to think about is if somebody comes in and says, we want to do to help our youth be more employable by increasing their soft skills, their ability to do a resume, to get up in the morning and actually get to work, and the little things employers really do like to have and show up every day, those kinds of things. Is there an organization already in the community that's doing that effectively? And what I would hope they would do is think about how can I direct you to that other group so that you all can work together.
Right.
Because I hate to see resources wasted in duplicative efforts when people are trying to do the same thing.
Right. Well, Evan, Leslie, I think this is all the time we have. I am quite impressed by these two projects that seem to emphasize the connection with the community and how that's turned into legal issues that attorneys help. Thank you so much for the information. It certainly was helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful for all of you that are viewing this. I want to remind you to join us in future conversations with Ruth, in which we will talk about other interesting practices of legal aid. Thank you.